it's Girl Pluto, and I'm here with my beautiful friend, professional astrologer Karen Teal, and we'd like to welcome you to our podcast series, Pluto and Aquarius, the energy surrounding you. Today, we're going to just talk a little bit about the Pluto and Aquarius transit and just give a general overview of what those energies are going to look like on the microcosmic level and the macrocosmic level. And then we will discuss a little bit about the spiritual significance of that for you. So I'm going to go ahead and turn this over to you, Karen, just to give us a background on what Pluto and Aquarius really means from an astrological perspective and the impact that people can anticipate here for themselves over the next 20 years and also globally.
Great. Yeah. So, hi, I'm Karen Teal, and we've been in Pluto in Capricorn since about 2008. So, I mean, if you can think that far back, um,
Housing market crisis.
yeah, I know. What was going on in your life in 2008? And was it something really significant? Was it something that kind of made you buckle down in a way? Because we're talking about Capricorn here, we're talking about getting serious. Maybe people were working on building their careers. We had a lot of kind of maybe as a collective lessons about maybe traditions, dealing with kind of a lot of older traditional authority figures, especially in America, we see kind of things like that. And that's kind of what we've been dealing with since 2008. So we're coming into this new era of, in ancient astrology, Aquarius is also ruled by Saturn. And so it's interesting that we're going from kind of one ancient Saturnian energy into this more progressive side of Saturn, where we think of Saturn as like this taskmaster, and that's maybe what we've been feeling since 2008. But now we're moving into almost this kind of lighter, freer side of Saturn, where you've worked really hard. You maybe can think of maybe what you've been hoping for, wishing for, but mainly working towards since 2008. And now that we're in Aquarius, it's how are we going to utilize all these things that we've learned? How are we going to implement traditions while also being progressive? And this is going to be happening on a collective scale. We're going to see it in the world, in politics, but we're also going to see it in kind of our microcosm, in things in our own immediate lives. So, if you've been having issues with your boss since 2008, maybe you're at a point now with Pluto going into Aquarius where you have a little bit more freedom, or maybe you're kind of over being bossed around by someone and you want to be more independent and be your own boss. And maybe you've been working towards that since 2008. So these are just some of the kind of general themes that we're moving into. And, earlier you mentioned that you felt lighter since Pluto went into Aquarius, that you felt a major energy shift. And I wonder how many other people experienced that too, because I mean, I had a pretty easygoing day yesterday too, and you definitely felt this going from this kind of heavy, earthy energy to more of like, it seemed like there was an opening of possibilities.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I find it quite interesting, as you mentioned, that that both Capricorn and Aquarius are ruled by Saturn. Aquarius is also ruled by Uranus. But when I think about comparing the Saturnian energy in Capricorn versus Aquarius, the Saturnian energy in Capricorn is like the workhorse energy. Capricorn as a sign is associated with the mountain of initiation and climbing and doing that hard work during the great work period. Whereas Aquarius, the Saturnian energy surrounding that sign, I look at it as the other side of Saturn, which is that Saturn is also the planet associated with gnosis. And that in that restriction of, distractions, from our lives, we actually get to enjoy true spiritual freedom. So, Saturn is both a planet that can make one feel kind of entrapped or overburdened. But at the same time, once you have your spiritual breakthroughs through those heavy lessons of Saturn, then you have true spiritual freedom. And, of all the planets, Saturn is the great rewarder. If you put that work
Absolutely.
in, you get the most rewards from it. And so I feel like a lot of the people who have spent time really doing, work on themselves internally are really starting to feel the fruits and the benefits of that. It's starting to feel a lot more free. And I've really noticed a lot of trends with other people I've been speaking with over the past week, as we've been moving into the transit and yesterday as well. Just things are really changing very significantly for people, and their perspectives on life are changing quite a bit.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And the sign of Aquarius is associated with, I might have mentioned earlier, hopes and wishes. So, this idea that you've been working your butt off, having all these limitations on you, restrictions, while Saturn has been in Capricorn. And then you move into Aquarius, and, there's still some work because Saturn likes work. But Aquarius is going to do it more their way. And there's this potential to achieve these hopes and dreams and these rewards that you've been working your butt off for all this time. And so the possibilities are just so open and endless. And then yes, I love that you mentioned also that of course, Aquarius is ruled by Uranus in the modern astrology. And so it brings in this whole idea of innovation. You probably people have been mentioning all over the place about the scientific breakthroughs and technological advancements, probably a lot of space exploration. I would think a lot of things having to do with air too. But Aquarius and Uranus are considered these very highly intelligent energies. In fact, some astrologers believe that Uranus is a higher octave of Mercury. So it's almost like Mercury more developed in a spiritual and intellectual sense, but also taking all the ideas that come in with Mercury and then how do we utilize them and bring it into something really tangible. And that's something Aquarian energy is really good at. I mean, they think outside the box, of course, but they also can take something that already exists and make it into something unique and even more helpful potentially than it was before.
Yeah, yeah, I've heard people say that the Aquarius is the genius sign, and,
Absolutely.
and I definitely see why that is, because if you consider the geniuses throughout history, and there have even been scientific studies done on Mensa members,
Oh
the
yeah.
number one characteristic of people who are considered geniuses is the ability to think outside the box. And that's what that Aquarian Uranus energy is. And then that balance with the Saturnian energy, that very earthy energy, to bring those higher ideals down into the physical and make it into something that's useful and valuable to humanity, and to the self. I'm an Aquarius rising, so and I'm very, very excited for everybody to just enjoy this transit. And I say it like that because I feel like there's often a lot of fear-based stuff out there, and with Pluto being such a transformative planet, transformation can be scary for people. And the idea that transformation can happen on a global scale, and that, historically speaking, Pluto and Aquarius has been associated with, revolutions and such, that can scare people too. But I feel like one of the things I really just want to convey to people is that the only change, the only constant is change. And if we really claim that change for ourselves, and we become the master of our internal landscape and essentially the captain of the ship, right? So we steer that ship through whatever's going on, then we get to determine how, that energy manifests for us in the end, rather than having it run roughshod over us. And so I'd really love to hear your thoughts on that, Karen, pertaining to um, you know, how Pluto and Aquarius has impacted the global consciousness, and the fruits that have come out of maybe what would be considered some historically tumultuous events.
Yeah, great. And sorry, my brain just blanked out for a second.
I got
Um,
ADD, so that happens to me all the time.
okay. Okay, good. Okay, I remember what it was. Oh yeah, and so, before I get into some of the historical aspects, I love that you mentioned this idea of that there's been a lot of kind of fear-based things going on in the collective for a while. And there is the possibility that things could kind of ramp up a little bit in that regard before they start getting really better, because later this month we are going to have a big stellium in Aquarius, and kind of the nature of air energy can be a little fearful sometimes. That's just kind of how that energy is. Because there's this kind of instinctual aspect where the fear helps us in a way. So when we do have that stellium in Aquarius later this month, with there's going to be a lot of energy, air energy, and Aquarius can be a little what's the word I'm looking for? Like if it's unbalanced, it can be a little bit erratic, because there's so many ideas and there can be a lot of overthinking that happens, because there's just so much high intelligence going on in the brains of people with a lot of Aquarian energy. So, when you are really smart, sometimes there is a little bit more fear that comes with it because you know the reality of what could happen. So just to kind of prepare everyone when we do get into this Aquarius stellium later in the month, just know that that energy maybe is not coming from you per se. It's more the outside environment. And so you could see that, especially with regard to like worldly events and stuff, you might see a little bit of that. But I think it will get better because the idea of Aquarius is to kind of come together as a collective. How do we work together as a group? And it rules friends. So it's how do we, come to a common ground with people? How do we find things in common? Because that's kind of how we make friends, right? So, and then, yeah. And so, like, with that being said, let's go into a little bit of what we've experienced in the two most recent times that Pluto has been in Aquarius throughout history. So, going further back, the first one I'll talk about is from 1532 to 1553. And that was actually the big kind of Catholic Reformation. So there was a lot going on with organized religion, and Catholicism was really building up into this big thing that it is today. So we have during that time, King Henry breaks away from the Catholic Church. The Jesuits form. There's all these new orders of Catholicism that are forming. The religion of I'm sorry if I don't pronounce this right, but Sikhism is established, which is another big religion. We have religious texts that are starting to be printed in new languages, which is kind of an interesting thing too, because there were texts that weren't available to the collective that during this time period are now becoming wildly available. So people maybe in a region that solely practices this one religion are now being exposed to other ideas, new ways of thinking that they maybe hadn't experienced before. We also have the Spanish conquests during this time, where sadly a lot of cultures were being flat out erased by all the conquesting that was going on. So that's what was going on the first time Pluto was in Aquarius. The second time, which is the more recent one, is from 1778. So right after the coming kind of off the tails of the American Revolution or the signing of the Declaration in 1776. And that went all the way to 1798. Now, I'm not a historian. I'm an astrologer, so pardon me, any historians out here, if I say the wrong thing, I apologize, and I totally don't mean to. It's just this is not my field of study, really. So we had a lot of revolutions going on during this period from 1778 to 1798. We have the American Revolution, the French Revolution, the Haitian Revolution, and the Industrial Revolution were the four big ones that I could find that were going on. We also have the Age of Enlightenment, which is the idea of reason over reaction. So a lot of big, heavy thinking, which Aquarius energy is great at, and abstraction over intimacy. So those were kind of the two big quotes that I found for the Age of Enlightenment. Some notable inventions during this period from 1778 to 98 were the hot air balloon, which I find very interesting because just about a week ago, there was, I saw on the news a big issue with a hot air balloon. And so I thought that was kind of interesting. That does seem very Aquarian to me because it has to do with the air. And then and it's kind of this cool invention for us to fly through the air. But we also have the invention of the sewing machine, the smallpox vaccine, the parachute. So another lots of air stuff going on during this time. And then we think of air as being associated with swords, and swords, you could also call it like a needle, if you will. And so that's the sewing machine. So I kind of thought all of those were interesting as pertaining to the air element. But the themes during this time period were about dismantling social hierarchies, resistance to power and authority, violence in response to economic disparity, revolutions in technology, which we're going to get a lot more of that this time too, scientific breakthroughs, of course, and then democracy was just coming up. So that democracy was a big hot topic that people were discussing and seeing how it could work for various systems. So those are kind of the big things that we experienced in the past. So it'll be interesting to see what we go through this time.
Yeah, I think it will be very interesting. And, you know, just those themes of, I think, breaking down the old guard, and the new kind of revelation of ideas. It's so important. And one thing I'd like to point out is that which was considered revolutionary in those ages now is starting to be considered old guard, right?
Yeah.
I think about things like Christianity. Christianity is very much associated with conservatism, especially in the West. And a lot of people are trying to break free from that. But if we really think about the historical aspect of Christ, Christ was a revolutionary.
Oh, yeah.
Is very much going against the grain. And and he was crucified for it, right? So if we keep these kind of things in perspective, I think it also, just going back to that concept of fear, helps us to understand that really fear is an illusion. And because fear is mentally based and is associated with air, air also can bring clarity though too. So if we just allow ourselves to remain centered, so that we can live in the truth, right? Really ask ourselves to reconcile ideas, within ourselves that may be impacted by societal norms, conditioning, preconceived notions, then that really helps us to just transmute through fear-based, thoughts that may try to come to us. And just know and understand that, while things may be changing around us, which they do every day things are changing around us, we'll be fine. And getting ourselves caught up in fear just invokes more perceptual fear around us. So we really, we have the ability to gain that control over our mental state of awareness, should we choose to.
Oh, absolutely. I definitely agree with that. And yeah, and it's using any energy from any fear experienced in a productive way and using it to push forward and using it as a motivator rather than letting it hold us back, which historically it has.
So yeah, just, Karen, I first of all want to say thanks for that great explanation on just the historical impact of Pluto and Aquarius. And if we think about the events that happened during, those previous transits, the theme that we see is, there may be some challenges both individually and on the collective conscious scale, but that those challenges ultimately result in breakthroughs. And with those breakthroughs, we have, a new sense of consciousness and, new inspiration for ourselves, globally in terms of our own freedom, as well as our own personal freedom. And I think that's just a great segue into chatting about the spiritual benefits of this particular transit. And I really hope that people, make it a goal to leverage this energy because it's going to be going on for 20 years. 20 years is quite a long time. If you're 20, you're going to be 40. If you're 40, you're going to be 60. If you're 60, you're going to be 80, right? And that's a pretty large cycle for which we can accomplish a great deal. And, for those of us who, maybe a little bit older, i.e. we have careers, we've been married, we have kids, once you get to a certain age, mid 20s, 30s, and life starts ramping up and it becomes so busy, then one thing we all notice is it seems like time just speeds up, especially when you have kids, right? Like my son is going to be 17 in April this year. And I just think, man, that went by so fast. And that's almost a 20-year transit, right?
Yeah.
So it's a long time. It's a good chunk of time to get stuff done, but it also goes by pretty quickly. So, I want to help people just jump on that wagon quickly and really start contemplating, how they can leverage this transit for their benefit. First and foremost, if we just go back and review the nature of the energies, Pluto is a transformational planet. It's also the planet of infinite wealth. And I feel like that is something that's never talked about, but what I feel like is critical. It's almost like how Saturn is a restrictive energy, but yet it's the energy of gnosis. Pluto is the planet of transformation and transmutation, but on the back end of that, it's the planet of infinite wealth. So what does infinite wealth mean? Well, when we think about wealth, most of us think about it in terms of monetary wealth, but true plutonic wealth is a wealth that's so vast that you don't recognize it on a small scale. And, we think about plutonic wealth is talked about in terms of, people like who are oligarchs, right? They just have so much money that, the normal person can never even fathom, what billions and billions of dollars, must be like, right? That's like a plutonic wealth concept in the material. But when we think about it spiritually speaking, this is a state of consciousness that I would consider tapping into the infinite universal unity consciousness. And when we talk about manifesting, that's the state we want to be in, right? Not that I want to degrade anybody, but I think it's interesting how when people, talk about manifesting, it's 90% of the time in terms of monetary wealth, right? But that's small potatoes. That's like scratching the surface, right? Imagine having the ability to just think of something, anything, and it just manifests into your life, right? With great power, of course, comes great responsibility. But to enter into that state of awareness where you can manifest anything, right? You have to have, a true inner transformation that allows you to be tapped into the infinite, stream of the Godhead. And there's a huge purification that comes with that. But also with that comes, true peace, inner wisdom, the ability to see things clearly. And I know that, pretty much anyone on the planet, if you ask them, would you like to have these things in your life? Wake up happy every day, at peace, knowing what the truth is, no fear, and just, knowing that when you're thinking something and it's manifesting, that is totally in alignment with what your true purpose is. I feel like almost anybody would resonate with that, right? And that to me is I feel like really where somebody can go during this transit if they really want to put the work into it. And that goes along too with that Aquarian energy of revolution and revelation. And I last night, right at the transit, I think it was 5:56 p.m. Mountain Time, live here in the mountains. I performed a ritual to bring in the beneficent properties of that energy. And I spoke to the archangel of Pluto, which is Azrael, very interesting, the angel of death. Um, and and also the angel associated with Aquarius, who's Combriel. And the message that was given to me was a formula, a magical formula, which I don't know. I just I'm so grateful for it. Magical formula always come out as something very simple. But if you think about the depths of it, you know, it just has layers and layers and layers. But the message that was given to me, which I was given permission to give to others, is don't live in fear, live in truth, and be love. And that's a step-by-step process, right? Live a fearless life, i.e., a life free from illusion. When you're living free from illusion, what are you doing? You're living in truth, in the truth of the light of the divine. And when you live in the truth of the light of the divine, you become love. And of course, God is love. So I want to share that with, you know, our listeners out there, because there's so much power in that, and you can use it in so many ways. For example, when I went to sleep last night and I was falling asleep, I just started thinking about all the things that I was grateful for. And then I also said to myself, I will live a fearless life. I will live a fearless life. I'll live a fearless life, like a mantra. And when I woke up this morning, you know, the change in consciousness I felt was pretty significant. Now, of course, I had done some significant spiritual work last night, which I'm sure augmented that, but I can feel the power in that formula, right? Just like there's power in the master formula, as above, so below, right? What is that about? It's about changing your internal landscape and seeing that reflected. So ultimately, if we work towards that modification, that augmentation of our internal landscape, which, you know, comes in living fearlessly, living in truth, and being love, then we can tap into that plutonic wealth, transformation, transmutation aspect of the transit. So I don't know. What do you think? Like, what do you see for people in terms of tapping into that energy so they can become their most potent self ever here over the next 20 years?
Well, yeah, I mean, I love that idea of that Pluto is infinite wealth. And I'm not just saying that because I have Pluto in my second house natally, which I just love hearing that from you. But it is, you know, it reminded me while you were talking of this idea of kind of, you know, the Pluto rules the eighth house. And then what does the eighth house represent? It is like inheritances. So it is this idea of like, you know, not everybody has this, but if you think about it in a monetary sense, an inheritance is money that you didn't work for, that you just kind of get this large amount of wealth to you. I mean, maybe you worked for it. It depends on the situation, of course, but the eighth house is that. And then it's also, you know, this idea of these really, really deep relationships. It rules the occult. And I just think all those things kind of tie into what you've been saying, because it's this idea, you know, the occult is us, you know, doing magic and manifesting things, and not just monetary things that you're saying, but it's manifesting through knowing yourself and going as deep as you can, going into the depths of your shadow, we'll say, and then coming out of it with all this kind of, what, you know, maybe unlimited gnosis, this gnosis that keeps going on and it never ends. You're never done. If you, anyone who gets into studying the occult, if you think you're done at any point, then I mean, I don't know. I just wouldn't agree with that, because I don't think you're ever done. It's this infinite amount of wealth. And if we don't think of wealth as money, then is wealth just knowledge? And how, you know, and then in that sense, you know, it would just kind of keep on going because there's always new things coming in. What was the other thing I wanted to say about that too? That was kind of interesting. And, you know, also while I was listening to all the wonderful things you were saying, I was also kind of drawing this connection of this idea that Pluto has to eliminate in order to build up stronger than before. And so a lot of times we have things eliminating from our life and we're trying to hold on to them so tightly because we don't know like why these things are being eliminated. What is the purpose of it? We can't see into the future, but Pluto is almost kind of giving us a promise in a way that if he's involved, you can assume that when there's a transit where Pluto's involved and things are breaking away from your life or being eliminated, maybe you lose a person in your life, whether it be death or whether you people just kind of what's the word? They fall away from each other, or they just drift away from each other. And it doesn't have to be a bad thing, but things need to make room for other things to come in. If you're working on manifesting things into your life, manifesting happiness, manifesting wealth, whatever that means to you, but you're not making room for those things, it's just all these things building up, and then it just gets really heavy, and you're probably going to feel stuck because you still have this blockage of things that, you know, you're that are preventing these other things from coming in. So on a macrocosmic scale, with this Pluto in Aquarius throughout history, and even in our modern time, we can kind of start to see the whisperings of things like this. It's kind of removing these things that maybe were considered tyranny or tyrannical to our existences, and it's progress against these things. And so in order for us things to get better, you know, we have to kind of have seen what we have been dealing with, if that makes sense. If there wouldn't be any tyranny to get rid of in the first place. I don't know, does that make sense?
It does, because, you know, human consciousness as compared to divine consciousness, human consciousness lives in a binary realm, right? Where there's black and white, there's things to compare, there's sides to take. And in the dichotomy between those two different sides, right, it allows us to understand something else. So, for example, you know, understanding what hate is allows us to understand what love is.
Right.
You know, understanding what tyranny is and oppression allows us to understand what freedom is. And because in our human consciousness, we don't have the capacity yet until we expand our consciousness into a more spiritual state to recognize the diversity in, you know, the kind of scaling of things as it moves from black to white. That's how our human mind learns to understand the depth of you know, the human experience, and essentially, you know, trains our consciousness over time to expand by seeing more, you know, seeing the gradient more and more, right? Until we get, you know, a marker of a person who has a mature state of consciousness is a person who can see, you know, both sides of an argument and all the kind of finer things that may exist within, and become the reconciler or find a reconciliation point, rather than, you know, putting a stake in the ground and saying, well, no, it's this way or that way, or that's it, right? That's a function of spiritual development as well. And you know, you brought up that that Pluto's associated with the eighth house, which, correct me if I'm wrong, is all, you know, is ruled by Scorpio. Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. So Scorpio, of course, is the death card in the tarot, right? And that's why I also thought it was interesting that Azrael is the archangel of Pluto. If we think about death from a physical perspective and what happens, right? Someone or something dies. We'll just talk about plants, right? In a forest, it dies, it decomposes, but from the decomposed material, right, that substrate, it becomes rich, it becomes fertile, so that new life can be reborn. And this is a process that's universal both to the physical realm as well to the spiritual realm. And I think it speaks a lot to the importance of being able to accept the process of death and transformation, i.e. when one door closes, another one opens, and you go through all of the kind of the inner work, to accept what's ended so that you can bring something new into your life, like you were saying, right? You have to create space. Not only are you creating space, but you're actually creating that new life, that new existence, that new consciousness from the decomposed matter, essentially, that was derived from that death experience. And what's that decomposed matter? It's what happens internally, right? If we think about sometimes like the pain, for example, that we experience when someone leaves our life, or something we're attached to ends, it can be, very tumultuous. But once we hit a point of clarification, right, and we are having that breakthrough, we feel, as that new consciousness is being rebirthed, it's being reborn, it's blossoming. And that's when we start to feel the relief, right? And then we look back on the experience and we can say, wow, I'm glad that happened. I'm really glad that happened. Maybe I wasn't glad when it first happened, but now I'm wiser. Now I understand more. Now I can appreciate more and become a better person. So, learning how to navigate your emotions, moderate your emotions, practice non-attachment, practice acceptance of change in our life is, I think, the critical key to being able to harness this particular energy and not move forward in fear, but say, okay, look, I understand something is happening, is changing, and I'm gonna leverage that. Maybe I don't feel great about it, but I can be grateful for it and accepting of it and let that process happen at a steadier pace, so that you're not stuck in it. Because lots of people love to get stuck in their transformation, right? Don't get stuck. Let yourself breathe into it and experience the beauty of it.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And don't get stuck in that, in that one stage where I don't know, actually maybe cut this out because I don't know what I'm saying. I was trying to go with the analogy of the plant growing, but it's almost like once you've broken down to the fertile, rich, nutrient rich part, it doesn't end there. It there still has to be the growth to come out of that too. You can, still be a hermit and sit in your lessons and know everything, but you still have to kind of come out of the dirt again at some point. I don't know what I mean by that, but
you have to demonstrate that you learned it. That's
right.
A very fine detail that I think a lot of people miss. People talk about transformation all the time, but not transmutation.
Right.
Transformation is something you can go back on, right? It's like gaining weight, losing weight. Like I gained 50 pounds and I lost 50 pounds. That's transformation. Transmutation is when you can't go back from it,
Yeah. You've
metamorphosis.
turned it into something new.
That's right. And how is it that process happens? It comes through demonstrating it. And a lot of people don't recognize that once you learn the lesson and the transformation has occurred within you, you actually will go through a test, right? It's like a final exam kind of thing,
Yeah.
where a very similar theme of something will come into your life, asking you, that's the spirit asking you to demonstrate that you really did transform and that you really did become the master of yourself and to move through that lesson in the appropriate way. And once you demonstrate that and do that, then now you truly have changed. And that's when you start to experience the wealth, the gifts, the spiritual gifts of that particular transformation. So I'm really glad that you brought that up.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, and I've noticed in my experience too, is that you do, if, depending on your state of mind, I think, because some people tend to be more on the pessimistic side of things and some people tend to be more optimistic and look for signs and everything and stuff. I will say that in my experience, you do get rewarded when you utilize these lessons that you've learned. And like, let's say you always navigated this one situation in this way and then you find out this isn't working for me, it's could be potentially toxic or whatever you might have it, but this is the way you learned it. You have to unlearn it. And then, yes, another situation after you feel like you have learned it will come in and be like, did you actually learn this lesson? put your money where your mouth is. And then if you do, you rise to the occasion, then there is some reward. And it could be spiritual, and maybe that's where people might miss it if they're on the more pessimistic side. But sometimes it's a real life gift too. Maybe someone new comes into your life. Like they always say that if you're looking for love, then stop looking for it, then look at yourself, and then the person will show up when you least expect it after you've worked on yourself. And people say that all the time, but I think when you're in a situation like that, it's hard to believe it until it actually happens to you. And then, and then there's, have you learned these lessons going through yourself? And then you get actually the relationship to put all those lessons to the test. How do you react when this person triggers you or pushes your buttons or whatever? And then, yeah, therein lies even more tests. And yeah, like I said, we're never done. And if you think you are, then you're not.
Yeah, no, it's true. And just speaking to that optimism, pessimism mentality, one could take a pessimistic attitude towards that, like, oh God, I'm never going to finish. What's the point? Right. Or you can take the perspective that because the divine is infinite and the divine is so beautiful, it's a constant, forever unfolding of a closer and closer relationship that you get to have with yourself, which is the divine, right? And so every lesson you have, every experience you go through just gives you more depth of an existence, a purpose driven existence and a passion driven existence, which, let's be honest, that's what everybody wants, right? They want to live with purpose and they want to live with passion. So recognizing the beauty and the constant relationship that you have the opportunity to formulate with the divine through experience is, I personally feel like is the way to really have that fulfilling life, and yeah, this is a great time to do it.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, the energies are ripe for it. And I mean, the possibilities are just endless because I mean, you hear Aquarius being associated with space a lot, because it's the air and it's so vast and it goes on for forever. And it's all these hopes and wishes and dreams and all this stuff that seems really far off. But in reality, is it? Not usually. It's usually right at our fingertips. It's just how do we remove the veil that's blocking it from being right in front of our face, I guess.
Yeah. I'm a big space nerd, so I mean,
Yeah. Oh, yeah, I know. And that Aquarius rising fits perfectly. And I mean, and people who enjoy like astral traveling and stuff like that, if you enjoy flying through space or checking out the planets and stuff, the remote viewing astral stuff like that. I know a lot of people have a lot of fun with that, exploring. You do realize that it is, it seems really far off, but it is actually pretty close if you know how to get there.
maybe we'll have to do an astral projection class or something. But
That would be so fun.
yeah, so on the note of, just really kind of leveraging this energy, maybe even like just more specifically, in our next podcast, I really loved the suggestion you made, to kind of go over the impact that the energy is going to have on people's ascendants. So, and we also talked about transits, but I'd really love to leave that ball in your court because
Sure.
this is really your subject matter expertise, in terms of what would be the next step. But being able to offer a series for people, I just am really blessed that we can do that. What do you think we should cover with our fam here for the next one?
Yeah, well, I was thinking that we could do, in the meantime, as we're gearing up for this next podcast, I would recommend that if you don't know what your rising sign is, that you find out. There's lots of websites online that can help you find it. You do need to know your birth time. however you can do that. There are ways where if you don't have your birth certificate, you can order another one. Maybe there's family members who might know roughly what time you're born. There are some astrologers who can take a major event in your life and backtrack. It's called rectifying, to find out when you were born. That's not something that I, tend to like. It's a lot of work, and there are astrologers who specialize in it. So that's kind of like a last resort if you can't get your birth certificate, if you can't roughly find out the time. Because the next podcast, I think we could look at the ascendant, and if you can get the degree, it's going to make it even more accurate. Not I won't be like going down by degree, but it will. If you know the degree, you'll know which house Pluto's going to start in, what house he's going to finish in by the time 20 years from now. Pluto moves very, very, very slowly. In fact, this year he's only moving like 1 degree really, or 2 degrees, because he's going to retrograde back into Capricorn in August, I believe, for a little bit. Then in November he'll come back into Aquarius again. So anything that is being started right now in your life, or even if you look at in the news or in the collective or whatever, anything that's kind of ramping up now, expect that in November that it would really kind of more come to fruition even more so. So I won't give any examples because there are things in the what?
So better set those intentions now.
Set those intentions now, because the Pluto retrograde gives us a chance to really kind of look at things again. Anything that maybe that 29 degrees Capricorn, anything like with authority or your career or your public image, or anything that falls into that category for you, whatever house it's in, you're going to have another opportunity to have another look at it this year. Because when Pluto fully goes into Aquarius and stays there for the next 20 years, we're going to be sticking with these more Aquarian type themes. And so things are going to be moving along, whether we like it or not, basically. But the other things that we'll look at in the next podcast is, we can even look at a little bit of the aspects if you want. We'll see if we have time for that, or maybe that could even be another podcast. But definitely we'll talk about the ascendants, and then so where in your life, your microcosm, these Pluto's transformations and blessings and all that good stuff is going to happen for you. And then if people are into that, we could even go a little bit deeper and look at what Pluto in Aquarius is going to mean for your Pluto sign, because there's only a few Pluto signs that are alive right now. So we have, I have Pluto in Scorpio. There are people on this earth who have Pluto in Libra, and then, all the kids that have been born after me, the Pluto in Sagittarius. And, but we could go even as far back as Pluto in Leo. So I think people born in the 30s, late 30s, have Pluto and Leo. And so we could go from Leo all the way to Capricorn, but that's just if that's something you guys are interested in, because we got some double Pluto action going on there, which could be, especially like people who have like fixed sign ascendants like yourself, and you're in a later degree, but I do know some people who have early degrees of fixed signs. I mean, I would be very curious to know what's going on with the 0-degree Taurus, 0-degree Scorpio people ascendants, what's been happening with you recently, because I would think that these people would really have been, having things going on in their life, good or bad, depending on how you look at it. So that's something that we'll get into more deeply.
I have a feeling that as this transit continues on, what I've noticed in the global consciousness is that more and more people are coming online to this type of the spiritual elements associated with a more occult path, because they're seeing it as something that's much more flexible, and it's always existed. You can look back historically speaking and find that astrology especially has been something that's been a major component of many of the world cultures and traditions, Mayans, Sumerians, Egyptians, ancient Greeks. This is not a new science, but it's very new to a lot of people in this era, because, after the scientific revolution, these kind of occult sciences were muted, right? They were mitigated to some degree, while human consciousness began to explore what science means. And my personal perspective is, there's two contending forces and one reconciling force. And we had a large portion of human history that focused a lot, on occult sciences. It wasn't a cult for them, right? It was a normal part of their life. It wasn't secret or magical, or only some people did it. Like, think about Egyptians and ancient Greeks. This was, in Romans, this was part of their everyday life, right? Part of their consciousness. Then humans shifted to, a more binary kind of, evaluation, which I, as a scientist myself and an engineer, I do appreciate, because it allowed people to understand, is this reasonable, right? So people don't just get taken advantage of, right? But now I think there's going to be a balancing. So I think that, just having this information out there is, while maybe it might not be relevant for people right up front, although I think there's a lot of viewers out there who will like it. I see that people will review these podcasts, and want to have that information, as they kind of develop their skill set and knowledge and understanding in this kind of area. So on that note, we should probably end, but just for clarity's sake, could you just give everyone, just a brief understanding, maybe just high level overview of why the ascendant is so important as compared to the sun sign? So as we move into the next podcast, people can understand the relevance of why we want to look into that.
Right. So, if you just study basic astrology, you'll know that we have the planets at play, we have the signs at play, and we have the houses at play. Now, the time that you're born determines your ascendant. So, I'm trying to figure out how to explain this in an easy way. So the sign on your ascendant is the sign that's in your first house. And then that determines which signs are in the rest of the houses of your wheel. And then wherever those planets are placed are then going to be in those houses. So everybody's sun sign, I'm a Pisces sun. There's lots of other Pisces suns out there. We don't all have our sun in the same house. The sun is the big kind of focus, that house is the big kind of focus of your life. I have a sixth house sun. So my big focus is on health, daily routine, pets, small animals. I used to work with animals a lot. I have a zoology degree. And so it all kind of checks out. But your ascendant is going to be kind of the energies that people would, when they first meet you, you might give off the impression of your ascendant. It's the sign that's in your first house. So it's a sign that you kind of put out into the world. And it's a sign that really kind of would show a lot of your personality, how you respond to the stimuli of life and stuff, and even kind of your perspective in a way. So I guess what I'm saying is just that, to find out where Pluto and Aquarius is going to be affecting you the most, you need to know what house it's going to be in, because that's going to show what area of your life. For me, Pluto is in my fifth house. And it has been in my fifth house because I have my fifth house starts with Capricorn and it ends with Aquarius. And I just had a baby a year ago, and Pluto was in Capricorn, and fifth house rules children. So did I have a transformation in children? Absolutely. And then my baby happens to be in Aquarius. So I'm going to be even more of a focus on him because he's just about to turn a year old. So that's just an example for my life and why the ascendant is important, because, everybody is going to be experiencing Pluto in Aquarius's energies on the macrocosmic scale. We're going to see it in the world and on the news, but you're also going to be having it happening in your immediate life. So if you have Pluto going through your seventh house, you're having transformations in your relationships in your life. You could have lawsuits that you're dealing with, things like that. And so that's kind of what we're going to be going over in the next podcast. And that is why your ascendant, or knowing what your rising sign is going to be important, because we'll be able to specifically look at how this transit's affecting you without me actually personally pulling up every single person's chart in the audience and reading it.
That's awesome. Thank you. Yeah.
Awesome.
Just for myself, I'm still learning. I'm learning from my full queen over here, Karen, about all this stuff.
Well, you know so much.
Well, trying. I'm a perpetual student.
Well, it's that Aquarius rising. It's you catch on to things fast, you learn really fast, and I'm sure you're an excellent at explaining it to people too.
Oh, well, thank you. That's sweet of you. Yeah, I just, for myself, I guess I have to like, I like to know the physical significance and the spiritual significance. So, in terms of the physical significance, am I correct in saying that your rising sign is like when you're born, then where the sun rises in the east that day, that's
Right,
where the first house starts, right? And then
right.
wherever the sun is in the sky, when you're like physical association with that.
Yeah, so when you were born in September, the sun was traversing through the sign of Virgo, but at the exact time you were born, it was rising in the east in the constellation of Aquarius.
Thank you. So
Yeah.
that was a detail I didn't feel very clear on. Thank you. So now I got to think. We'll talk more about that because now I'm thinking about the significance, the spiritual significance of where the sun rises, in terms of like spiritual awakening and stuff. So yeah, that gives us a lot to.
It does. It gives you a clue that your awakening could happen through Aquarian means, and that would have a big implication for the time we're in that we're just discussing. So, um, yeah. And I just want to do a disclaimer that I'm not an astronomer. So if I, it- you know, it, so sometimes explaining it in an astronomical way is different because I'm an intuitive astrologer. So,
Do
hopefully
know an astronomer, and I do want to
yes.
see if I can get her. Maybe it would be sweet to do a podcast with an astronomer and astrologer.
Yeah, I would love to do one with her. I know who you're talking about.
Is yes, we'll see. We'll see if we can. We'll see if we can manifest her presence. Because
Yeah.
that'd be so sweet to have the scientific, view, SME, the subject matter expertise, and the professional astrologer. That would be super awesome. So,
Yeah.
well, I'm so glad we got to meet up today. Thank you for your insight and your wisdom. Everybody, we love you so much. Thanks for joining us, and please, drop your comments in the chat for us so we know what's resonating with you. We're doing these for you. We want to help you. We want to support you, especially through the Pluto and Aquarius transit. So, your feedback is very much appreciated because it will help us to develop more content for you. And we hope you have a blessed day. Mwah, mwah, mwah. We love you all, and we'll see you next time. Bye, everyone.
Bye.